When my father announced Daniel as the new managing partner of Wilson & Associates at our annual firm gala, I maintained my composure despite the champagne flute nearly slipping from my fingers. 10 years I had dedicated to transforming our struggling family practice into Westridge's premier law firm, while my brother had failed the bar exam twice and only joined 3 years ago because Dad insisted. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As everyone applauded, Daniel smugly raised his glass in my direction. To carrying on the Wilson legacy, he toasted, his voice dripping with unearned confidence. I smiled politely, but later that night in my office, I unlocked the hidden safe behind the bookshelf where I'd been collecting evidence of exactly how my father and brother had been carrying on the family legacy. Embezzling client funds, falsifying billing records, and jeopardizing everything I'd built. They thought making Daniel managing partner would protect them. They had no idea I was about to become their worst nightmare. I remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong at Wilson & Associates. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our corner office on the 17th floor. I had just won the Burlington Industries case, a verdict that would bring in 7 figures and cement our reputation as the go-to firm for corporate litigation in Westridge. The courtroom victory had been exhilarating, but something about the celebration afterward felt hollow. "Exceptional work as always, Megan," my father said, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder before moving to pour himself another glass of the expensive scotch reserved for special occasions. "This is exactly why our clients trust Wilson & Associates." Daniel lounged on the leather sofa across from my father's imposing mahogany desk, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging the firm's biggest win of the year. He hadn't contributed a single billable hour to the case. "The jury was practically eating out of your hand," Jason Stewart remarked, his pride evident. As the senior partner who had mentored me since I'd joined the firm fresh out of law school, Jason had been the first to recognize my potential, even when my own father seemed blind to it. "It wasn't just me," I replied, habitually deflecting praise. "Lauren prepared an incredible brief, and the whole team—" "Always so modest," my father interrupted with a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But we all know who the star," and he raised his glass, "to Megan Wilson, the face of our success." The face, but never the leader. That distinction had always seemed just out of reach. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I returned to my office to gather some files. As I passed my father's office, I noticed the door slightly ajar, an unusual occurrence given his obsession with privacy. Voices drifted out. My, father's, and Daniel's, their tones hushed but intense. "We need to move things around before the quarterly audit," my father was saying. "The Harrington Trust alone is raising red flags." "Can't we just use the Mason settlement to cover it temporarily?" Daniel suggested. "No one checks those dormant accounts." "Too risky after that incident with the Richardson funds." Megan nearly caught that one. I froze, my breath catching. The Richardson case had been one of my first major victories 3 years ago. The settlement had seemed oddly diminished when it was finally distributed, but my father had dismissed my concerns about the numbers not adding up. "Litigation costs, Megan. This is why you're the litigator and I handle the firm's finances." "Speaking of Megan," Daniel continued, lowering his voice further, "what are we going to do about her? She's starting to ask questions about the billing discrepancies in the Brookfield case." My father's sigh was heavy. "Don't worry about your sister. I've been managing her expectations her entire career. She sees what I want her to see." The floor seemed to shift beneath me. 10 years of dedication, of believing I was building something meaningful alongside my father, collapsed into a terrible new reality. I quietly retreated to my office, mind racing, heart pounding against my ribs. The Wilson & Associates that the public knew was Westridge's crown jewel of legal representation. Founded by my grandfather Walter Wilson in 1968, it had begun as a humble practice focused on real estate law. My father, Richard Wilson, had expanded its reach into corporate law during the economic boom of the 1990s. When I joined in 2014 after graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Law and turning down offers from prestigious New York firms, local news outlets had run features on the Wilson dynasty. Megan Wilson returns to her roots to carry on the family tradition, the headlines had proclaimed. I'd believed it then, that I was fulfilling my destiny, honoring my grandfather's legacy by helping my father elevate the firm to national prominence. What no one mentioned in those glowing profiles was how close Wilson and Associates had come to collapse before my return. The recession had hit my father's corporate clients hard, and several questionable investments had depleted the firm's reserves. It was my tireless work, my networking, my legal innovation that had pulled us back from the brink. "You're just like your grandfather," Jason often told me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He had that same fire, that same integrity. Integrity. The word tasted bitter now as I sat in my modern apartment in Emerald Court, surrounded by awards and press clippings that suddenly felt like props in an elaborate charade. The Burlington Industries celebration had been 3 weeks ago, and since then, I'd been conducting my own quiet investigation into the firm's finances. What I found sickened me. Systematic embezzlement from client trust accounts, padded hours, misappropriated settlement funds. The evidence was carefully hidden but unmistakable once I knew where to look. Most damning was a hidden account in the Cayman Islands with regular deposits coinciding with our major case settlements, accessible only to my father and, more recently, Daniel. I confronted my father on a Sunday morning at the family mansion where I'd grown up. The sprawling Victorian in West Ridge's historic district had always represented stability and tradition to me. Now its manicured perfection seemed like just another facade. He was in his home office, surrounded by dark wood paneling and leather-bound law books that hadn't been opened in years. Technologies change, but the appearance of scholarly wisdom never goes out of style in our profession. "Dad, we need to talk about the firm's finances," I said without preamble. He barely looked up from his laptop. "If this is about your bonus from the Burlington case, the partners' meeting is next week." "It's about the Richardson settlement," I replied, watching his face carefully. "And Brookfield. And at least a dozen other cases where money has disappeared." His fingers stilled on the keyboard. "Disappeared is a strong word, Megan. Embezzled would be more accurate." The silence that followed was deafening. When he finally met my gaze, I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. His eyes were cold, calculating, a stranger wearing my father's face. "You should be careful making accusations you can't substantiate," he said quietly, "especially against family. I have bank records, Dad, transfer authorizations with your signature, discrepancies in client account statements." He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Always the thorough one. Your mother would have been proud." The mention of my mother, gone 15 years now to cancer, felt like a deliberate wound. "How long?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. "How long have you been stealing from our clients?" "Managing cash flow," he corrected, as if the terminology could sanitize the crime. "It started during the recession. Temporary measures that became necessary for the firm's survival." "And Daniel? When did he become involved?" A thin smile. "Your brother understands practical realities. The law is one thing, Megan. Business is another. It's illegal," I said flatly, "and it violates everything grandfather built this firm to represent. Your grandfather was an idealist who died leaving barely enough to cover his funeral expenses," my father snapped, his composure cracking. "I built Wilson and Associates into what it is today. Me, not him, and certainly not you with your courtroom theatrics and media interviews." The dismissal stung, but I pressed on. I'm going to the ethics committee. This stops now. He studied me for a long moment, then laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. No, you won't. Try me. If Wilson and Associates goes down, your reputation goes with it. Every case you've won, every client you've represented, all tainted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Your precious career would be over. He stood, straightening his custom-tailored shirt with practiced precision. Besides, who do you think the ethics committee will believe? Me, with 30 years of connections throughout the legal community? Or you, the ambitious daughter who's always been resentful of her brother's place in the firm? Daniel has no place in the firm, I retorted. He failed the bar twice before barely passing. He contributes nothing except a willingness to help you steal. Daniel is a Wilson man, my father said, as if that explained everything. He understands legacy. I left the mansion that day with my world fundamentally altered. The father I'd admired my entire life, whose approval I'd sought through years of academic excellence and professional dedication, had not only betrayed our clients and the law, but saw nothing wrong with it. Worse, he'd brought my less capable brother into the scheme while keeping me in the dark, using my reputation and legal skill as the firm's legitimate face. Over the next month, I weighed my options carefully. Going to the authorities would indeed destroy the firm and potentially my career along with it. My father's connections ran deep. Judges, other attorneys, even the district attorney had been a guest at our family's Thanksgiving table last year. I consulted discreetly with Vanessa Parker, a family friend who had known my mother and worked as a financial forensic investigator. "This is explosive, Megan," she said, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered in her small office across town, deliberately chosen for its distance from our usual professional circles. "But your father's right about one thing. Blowing the whistle would have serious consequences for you too. So I just let them continue stealing? That's not an option." Vanessa tapped her pen against her desk thoughtfully. "There might be another way, one that gives you leverage without immediate nuclear fallout." Her plan was elegant in its simplicity. Continue gathering evidence, but focus on creating a documented timeline that separated my work and cases from the financial improprieties. Essentially, build a firewall between my professional reputation and my father's crimes. "You need to be strategic," she advised. "Richard and Daniel won't hesitate to throw you under the bus if they feel cornered." I threw myself into the investigation, with the same intensity I brought to my biggest cases. Late nights reviewing financial records, covert meetings with former clients whose settlements had been compromised, careful documentation of every discrepancy, every forged signature, every manipulated account statement. Lauren Taylor, my most trusted colleague at the firm, noticed my distraction. "Is everything okay, Megan? You seem elsewhere lately." I considered confiding in her but decided against it. The fewer people involved, the better. "Just focused on the Westbrook merger," I lied. "It's consuming all my mental bandwidth." The annual firm gala was approaching, the most prestigious event on Wilson and Associates' calendar. Clients, judges, and the city's legal elite would all be in attendance. My father had been dropping hints for weeks about a special announcement to be made that evening. "It's going to change the future of the firm," he told me during our weekly lunch, the ritual we'd maintained since my first day at Wilson and Associates. "I think you'll be pleased." I nodded, maintaining the facade of the dutiful daughter while inwardly recoiling at his hypocrisy. 3 days earlier, I'd discovered evidence that he and Daniel had diverted nearly $2 million from the Burlington Industries settlement into their offshore account. The night of the gala arrived with perfect dramatic timing. The venue was the grand ballroom at the Westridge Plaza Hotel, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements in the firm's colors of navy and silver. I wore a black dress that my mother had always said brought out the intensity in my eyes. my hair swept up in an elegant twist. I spotted my father and Daniel near the stage, both in impeccable tuxedos, accepting congratulations and well wishes from the city's power players. My brother's wife, Sophia, resplendent in emerald green, clung to his arm like an accessory. She caught my eye across the room and offered a simpering smile that didn't reach her eyes. Our relationship had been strained since the day Daniel brought her home from their honeymoon in Bali, funded by firm money that should have gone to client restitution. "You look like you could use this," Jason said, appearing at my elbow with a glass of champagne. At 65, he remained as sharp and observant as when he'd first taken me under his wing. "Is it that obvious?" I accepted the glass gratefully. "Only to someone who's known you since you were arguing case law at family dinners." His gaze drifted to my father and brother. "Any hints about Richard's big announcement?" "None that I can decipher," I replied truthfully. The evening progressed, with the usual speeches and recognitions. I accepted an award for the Burlington case with practiced humility, thanking the team and our client representatives. Throughout it all, I maintained the perfect professional smile that had become second nature. Finally, my father took the stage, commanding attention with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to power. "Wilson & Associates has always been more than a law firm," he began, his voice carrying through the ballroom. "It's been a family committed to legal excellence and client service. Tonight, as we celebrate another successful year, I'm looking toward our future." My heart rate accelerated. For a wild moment, I wondered if he had somehow discovered my investigation and was about to publicly discredit me. "Leadership transitions are crucial moments in any organization's life," he continued. "They require careful consideration of who embodies the firm's values and vision. After much reflection, I've decided it's time to name a new managing partner who will guide Wilson & Associates into its next chapter." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me, the assumed heir apparent given my track record and contribution to the firm's success. "It gives me immense pride to announce that the new managing partner of Wilson & Associates will be my son, Daniel Wilson." The champagne flute nearly slipped from my fingers as scattered applause broke out, more confused than enthusiastic. Daniel strode to the stage, embracing our father with triumphant satisfaction. "Thank you, Dad," he said into the microphone. "And thank you all for your support. Wilson & Associates is entering an exciting new era, building on the foundation my father established. Not a word about our grandfather who founded the firm, not a mention of my contributions that had saved it from collapse. I'd like to especially thank my sister Megan," Daniel continued, finding me in the crowd with a smug smile. "Her courtroom successes have been invaluable. She'll continue to serve our clients as head of litigation while I focus on the firm's broader strategic direction." A demotion packaged as a compliment. I raised my glass in acknowledgement, my face a mask of professional dignity while inside. Something hardened into cold resolve. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and platitudes. I moved through conversations on autopilot, accepting condolences thinly disguised as support. "It should have been you, Lauren," whispered when we found a moment alone near the dessert table. "Everyone knows it." "Apparently not everyone," I replied, watching as my father introduced Daniel to Judge Hamilton, whose retirement party I had attended just last month at my father's insistence. Later that night, after the gala had wound down, I returned to the office. The building was deserted, security nodding at me with the familiarity of someone accustomed to my late hours. In the silence of the 17th floor, I unlocked the hidden safe behind the bookshelf in my office where I'd been storing the evidence of my father and brother's crimes. The USB drive contained everything: bank records, client account discrepancies, offshore transfers, recorded conversations from meetings I'd accidentally left my phone in. I had originally planned to confront my father privately one more time before taking more drastic measures. Now, with Daniel's appointment as managing partner, the timeline had accelerated. My father had always taught me that in law, timing was everything. File too early and you might lack crucial evidence. File too late, and the statute of limitations could expire. The moment to act had to be perfect. The following evening, I knew my father and Daniel would be celebrating at the Aspen Room, the upscale restaurant where our family had marked every significant milestone. My mother's last birthday before her diagnosis, my admission to Harvard Law, Daniel's wedding rehearsal dinner. The restaurant held years of memories, all now tainted by the knowledge of my father's true character. I made a reservation for one, timing my arrival for 30 minutes after I knew they would be seated. The maitre d' recognized me immediately. "Miss Wilson, lovely to see you. Your father mentioned you might join them. They're at your usual table." Of course he had, always maintaining appearances. They were sharing the 25-year-old Macallan, Daniel already flushed with the effects of alcohol and elevation to unearned power. My father saw me first, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness to calculated welcome. "Megan," he called, gesturing to the empty chair. "Join us. We're celebrating." "So I see," I replied, approaching their table with measured steps. I placed my leather portfolio on the table, its presence between us like a declaration of war. Daniel raised his glass unsteadily. "To the future of Wilson and Associates." "The future?" I echoed, not touching the scotch my father had already poured for me. "That's actually why I'm here." Something in my tone made my father straighten, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Daniel's appointment will be good for the firm, Megan. You'll see." "Will the ethics committee see it that way?" I asked softly. "Or the bar association? Or the clients whose trust funds you've been raiding?" The color drained from Daniel's face. My father remained impassive, though I caught the slight tightening of his grip on his glass. "Keep your voice down." I opened the portfolio and removed a manila envelope, sliding it across the table. "Managing partner comes with responsibilities, Daniel. Are you prepared to handle them?" His hands trembled as he opened the envelope, pulling out bank statements highlighted with damning transfers, copies of forged client signatures, and a detailed accounting of misappropriated funds. "What is this?" he demanded, though we all knew exactly what it was. "Insurance," I replied, calmly, "or evidence, depending on what happens next." My father's voice was dangerously low. "If you think you can threaten us—" "Not a threat, Dad, a choice." I leaned forward. "Daniel resigns as managing partner, citing personal reasons. You announce your retirement, effective immediately. The firm transitions to new leadership with a complete financial audit and full restitution to all affected clients. And if we refuse this generous offer?" My father's tone was icy. I removed a second envelope from the portfolio. "Then tomorrow morning, these documents go to the district attorney, the bar association, and every client on this list of affected accounts." Daniel looked to our father in panic. "We can't let her—" "She's bluffing," my father cut in. "Megan knows that exposing us would destroy her own career." I met his gaze steadily. "That's where you're wrong. I've been building the case for months, documenting my separation from the financial improprieties. Yes, there would be fallout. But I've already had conversations with Harrington and Blake about joining their practice if necessary." The mention of our main competitor was a calculated blow. My father's expression hardened. "You would betray your family for your own ambition?" The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "This stopped being about family the moment you started stealing from our clients and using my reputation to cover your tracks." Daniel, increasingly desperate, tried a different approach. "What do you want, Megan? A co-managing partnership? We can arrange that." "I want," I said deliberately, "what grandfather built this firm to be, a place of legal integrity. And I want what I've earned through a decade of dedication while you were failing the bar and dating your way through Westridge's social scene." My father studied me with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time not his compliant daughter, but a formidable opponent. "And your terms for this transition?" "I become managing partner. All misappropriated funds are returned within 30 days through a structure I've already outlined with Vanessa Parker to avoid raising red flags. You both retain your equity, but have no operational control. Or," I added, "you can take your chances with a jury." The silence that followed was broken only by the ambient sounds of the restaurant, quiet conversations, the clink of silverware against fine china, the subtle notes of a piano in the background. In that moment of suspended animation, I thought of my mother and what she would make of this confrontation. She had always seen the best in people, including my father. Had she known who he really was? "You're more like me than I realized," my father finally said, an odd note of pride in his voice. "I'm nothing like you," I replied evenly. "I'm my mother's daughter and my grandfather's heir." In the weeks that followed, Wilson and Associates underwent a transformation that the legal and community of Westridge observed with fascinated speculation. My father announced his retirement to spend more time on personal interests. Daniel stepped back from his briefly held managing partner position, citing family priorities, a convenient excuse following Sophia's suspiciously timed pregnancy announcement. The official press release named me as the new managing partner, emphasizing my track record of successful litigation and vision for the firm's future. A financial restructuring was framed as modernization and preparation for expansion. Behind the scenes, the reality was more complex. Vanessa Parker oversaw the quiet restoration of misappropriated funds, disguised as accounting corrections and investment returns. Clients remained unaware that their trust had ever been violated. The offshore account was closed, its contents used to make the first round of restitution. My father maintained a dignified public persona while privately seething at the reversal of fortune. During our last private conversation in what was now my office, the corner suite with views of the city he had once refused to give up, he made one final attempt to justify his actions. "Everything I did was to secure the firm's future," he insisted. "Your future. Save it for your memoirs," I replied, not looking up from the documents I was reviewing. "We both know it was always about you." He lingered in the doorway. The managing partnership was supposed to be Daniel's legacy. What he lacked in legal brilliance, he made up for in loyalty. I finally met his gaze. Grandfather left us an actual legacy, one of integrity and service. That's what I'm restoring. "Your grandfather was a fool who died in debt," he snapped. "He died with his reputation intact," I countered. "How many people will be able to say the same about you?" 6 months after the confrontation at the Aspen Room, Wilson and Associates hosted a more modest reception to celebrate its new direction. Jason Stewart, now elevated to senior counsel, raised a toast to the firm's commitment to ethical practice and client service. Lauren Taylor, promoted to head of litigation while I focused on managing partner duties, stood proudly at my side. Daniel and my father attended but remained on the periphery, their influence diminished but family appearances maintained. Some things in Westridge society never changed. The importance of presenting a united front despite private fractures. As I circulated among our guests, Gregory Collins, the CEO of our largest corporate client, pulled me aside. "I never said anything," he began awkwardly. "But there were discrepancies in our settlement account 3 years ago. They were corrected before I could raise concerns, but I always wondered. Administrative oversights from that period have been thoroughly addressed," I assured him smoothly. "Wilson and Associates' commitment to transparent client service is stronger than ever." He nodded, satisfied with the non-answer that nevertheless acknowledged his unstated question. "Your grandfather would be proud, Megan. Walter always said the law was about trust above all else." Later that evening, alone in my office, I pulled out my grandfather's pocket watch, the only possession of value he had left behind. My father had kept it in a drawer, dismissing it as sentimental junk compared to his own collection of luxury timepieces. I had reclaimed it during the transition. The worn inscription inside the case caught the light. Justice and integrity endure when all else fails. My grandfather had understood something my father never did. Success built on deception creates a foundation that cannot stand. It had taken discovering my father's betrayal for me to fully appreciate the example my grandfather had set. Not of wealth accumulation or social status, but of building a legacy that could withstand scrutiny and time. Wilson and Associates would continue, not as the Wilson dynasty my father had envisioned, but as the firm my grandfather had intended, one where the law served justice rather than personal gain. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Reputations, in legal circles, are both precious and fragile. But for the first time since discovering my father's deception, I felt I was truly honoring the Wilson name. Not my father's version of it, but something older and truer that had nearly been lost. Something worth fighting for. The days following the gala unfolded in a surreal haze. I arrived at the office each morning at precisely 7:15 a.m., just as I had for the past decade, but everything felt fundamentally altered. The congratulatory flowers on Daniel's new desk in the managing partner's office. The subtle shift in how staff addressed him. The knowing glances exchanged between my father and brother during meetings. What stung most wasn't the title. I'd never cared much for administrative power, but the blatant dismissal of merit in favor of nepotism. Merit that had literally saved the firm from bankruptcy. It's business as usual, my father assured the BRI partners during our Monday morning meeting, Daniel nodding solemnly beside him like a ventriloquist's dummy. Megan will continue handling our highest profile litigation. Daniel will focus on firm strategy and client relationships. Client relationships. As if Daniel had ever brought in a single significant client. His contributions to Wilson and Associates consisted primarily of attending charity galas on the firm's dime and occasionally sitting in on depositions where he remained conspicuously silent. "Of course," I replied with practiced professionalism when all eyes turned to me. "I'm looking forward to focusing exclusively on our casework." Lauren caught my eye across the conference table, her expression a mix of sympathy and indignation. As we filed out of the meeting, she fell into step beside me. "This is absolute bullshit," she muttered once we were safely in my office with the door closed. Lauren had been my right hand for 7 years, brilliantly managing our litigation team while I took the lead in the courtroom. Her loyalty was unwavering. "Everyone knows Daniel can barely find the courthouse without GPS. It's a family business," I replied, the words tasting bitter. Emphasis on family, apparently. "Your family," she reminded me. "You're as much a Wilson as they are." Not in my father's eyes, it seemed. I'd spent years attributing his preference for Daniel to old-fashioned gender bias, a relic from his own father's era when law was still predominantly a man's profession. But the truth was more fundamental. Daniel was malleable, compliant, willing to look the other way or actively participate when ethical lines were crossed. I, on the other hand, had always been my mother's daughter. Elizabeth Wilson had been the moral compass of our family, a former prosecutor who left her career to raise us, but never abandoned her principles. "The law isn't just a profession," she would tell me. "It's a covenant of trust." She had died believing her husband shared that view. The intercom on my desk buzzed. "Ms. Wilson, Mr. Reynolds is here to see you." Andrew Reynolds. The name alone was enough to trigger a complex cascade of emotions. We'd started at Wilson and Associates in the same year, both bright young attorneys with promising futures. Our relationship had evolved from collegial to something more intimate, until he'd abruptly left the firm 3 years ago for a position at Harrington and Blake, our most significant competitor. The professional betrayal had been complicated by the personal one. "Send him in," I instructed, straightening papers on my desk to hide my surprise. Andrew hadn't set foot in these offices since his departure. He entered with the same confident stride I remembered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that complemented his athletic frame. At 36, Andrew looked even more polished than when we'd been together. Success agreed with him. "Megan," he said, his voice warmer than I'd expected. "Thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Professional courtesy," I replied, with deliberate neutrality. "What can Wilson and Associates do for Harrington and Blake today?" He smiled, recognizing the deflection. "Actually, this isn't about either firm. May I?" He gestured to the chair across from my desk. I nodded, curiosity overcoming my initial wariness. "I wanted to congratulate you in person," he said once seated. "The Burlington Industries verdict was exceptional work." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised by the gesture. "It was a complicated case." "I followed the trial coverage. Your cross-examination of their expert witness was masterful." I allowed myself a small smile. The expert in question, a renowned economist who'd testified in dozens of similar cases, had walked into my carefully constructed trap, contradicting his own prior testimony and ultimately undermining the defense's entire position. "Was that the only reason for your visit, to compliment opposing counsel?" Andrew leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more serious. "I also wanted to say that I was surprised to hear about the managing partner announcement. Everyone in the legal community expected it would be you." The sincere disappointment in his voice caught me off guard. After all this time, he still knew exactly how to disarm me. "Family dynasties have their own succession plans," I replied, aiming for diplomatic but landing closer to resigned. "That's not the Richard Wilson I knew," Andrew said, studying me carefully. "He always seemed meritocracy-driven, especially with his own children. He was harder on you than anyone." If only Andrew knew how right he was, and how wrong. My father's exacting standards had been a performance, establishing plausible deniability while he operated in ethical gray areas, behind the scenes. "People change," I said simply. Andrew nodded slowly. "They do." Which brings me to the actual reason for my visit. He reached into his suit jacket and removed a business card, placing it carefully on my desk. "I've been authorized to have a conversation with you about your future." I glanced at the card, Andrew Reynolds, senior partner, Harrington and Blake, then back at him, one eyebrow raised. "Are you attempting to poach me, Andrew?" "I prefer to think of it as recognizing an opportunity for mutual benefit," he replied with the hint of a smile. "Harrington and Blake is expanding our corporate litigation division. We need someone with your expertise and track record." The audacity was breathtaking. "You're asking me to leave my family's firm? The practice my grandfather founded?" "I'm offering you the recognition your family just denied you," he countered. "Senior partner status, your own team, compensation that I guarantee exceeds your current arrangement." I leaned back in my chair, studying him with new interest. "And what does Marcus Bennett think of this recruitment effort?" Bennett was the managing partner at Harrington and Blake, known for his ruthless approach to business and his long-standing rivalry with my father. "It was his idea," Andrew admitted, "but I volunteered for the assignment." Of course he had. Andrew had always enjoyed being at the center of delicate negotiations. 3 years ago, when he'd announced his departure from Wilson and Associates, he'd framed it as an opportunity too good to refuse. Only later did I learn he'd been actively courted for months before making his decision, all while we were still involved personally. "This feels a bit like déjà vu," I observed coolly. "You, leaving for greener pastures. Only this time you're extending an invitation." He had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. "Fair point. My departure wasn't handled well on a personal level. I've regretted that." "But not professionally?" "Professionally, it was the right move." His candor was refreshing at least. "And it could be for you too, Megan, especially now." I tapped my fingers against the arm of my chair, considering him and his offer. 3 days ago, I might have dismissed the suggestion outright. My loyalty to Wilson and Associates had been absolute, despite my growing awareness of my father's preference for Daniel. But that was before I'd overheard their conversation about financial improprieties. Before I'd begun my own investigation, and discovered just how deep the ethical violations went. Andrew's offer presented an intriguing alternative to my current dilemma. Instead of fighting to expose my father and brother's misdeeds from within, potentially destroying the firm and my own reputation in the process, I could simply walk away. Start fresh at a rival firm, maintaining my professional standing while leaving the Wilson men to their inevitable downfall. It was tempting, seductively simple. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally, "but I need time to consider." He nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Of course, this isn't a decision to make lightly." Andrew stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. "The offer will remain open. Marcus authorized me to be quite flexible on terms." I rose as well, maintaining the professional formality that now defined our interactions. "I'll be in touch." At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, Megan, your contributions to Wilson and Associates haven't gone unnoticed in the wider legal community. Whatever you decide, remember that." After he left, I remained standing by the window, gazing out at the Westridge skyline that had been the backdrop to my entire legal career. The city's courthouse dome gleamed in the distance, a monument to the ideals of justice and fairness that had drawn me to law in the first place. Ideals that seemed increasingly distant within the walls of Wilson and Associates. My office phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed my father's extension. "Megan, I need you to join a meeting with the Hartford Technologies team," my father said without preamble when I answered. "They're expressing concerns about Daniel's new oversight role." Of course they were. Hartford Technologies was our second largest client, a relationship I'd cultivated personally through 3 rounds of complex patent litigation. "When?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Now, conference room B." "I'll be right there." I hung up, unsurprised by the summons. This would be the first of many such interventions. My father and brother needed my credibility to maintain client confidence while they mismanaged the firm behind the scenes. As I gathered my Hartford Technologies files, Andrew's offer lingered in my mind. The path of least resistance. A clean break. But something else nagged at me. A deeper responsibility to the firm my grandfather had built, to the clients who trusted us, to the principles that had guided my career. The Hartford Technologies executives brightened visibly when I entered the conference room. Relief replaced the concern evident on their faces, confirming my suspicions about the nature of the meeting. "Megan, good to see you." Martin Hartford, the company's founder and CEO, said warmly. "We were just discussing the transition in leadership." My father stood at the head of the table, Daniel awkwardly positioned at his right hand. I was explaining that Megan will continue handling all aspects of Hartford's legal matters personally, my father said smoothly. "The management change won't affect your service quality." I smiled professionally, taking the seat across from Martin. "Absolutely. In fact, I was reviewing your upcoming patent filing this morning. The innovations in the new processing chip are impressive." As the meeting progressed, the dynamic became increasingly clear. I was the substance, Daniel and my father the figureheads. When technical questions arose, Martin and his team looked to me. When reassurances were offered, my father and Daniel provided them, making promises about resources and attention that I would ultimately have to fulfill. By the time we concluded, Hartford Technologies was sufficiently reassured to maintain their relationship with the firm, a relationship worth 7 figures annually in billable hours. "Walk with me," my father instructed as we left the conference room. Daniel remained behind, making awkward small talk with Hartford's legal counsel. We moved through the corridors of the 17th floor, nodding acknowledgement to associates and staff. To outside observers, we were the picture of harmonious succession, the founding family united in leadership. "That went well," my father commented once we reached his office. The corner suite had been my grandfather's originally, its wood-paneled walls and vintage law books a stark contrast to the modern glass and steel that characterized the rest of the redesigned offices. "Did you expect otherwise?" I asked, declining his gesture toward a chair. I preferred to remain standing, keeping the conversation brief. "Hartford is nervous about change. They need to see continuity." He settled behind his desk, the position of authority as natural to him as breathing. "You provided that. And I'll need to provide it with every major client, I assume. While Daniel enjoys the managing partner title and compensation?" My father's expression hardened slightly. "Your brother is learning. He has other qualities valuable to the firm." "Such as?" "Loyalty, for one," he replied pointedly. "A commitment to family legacy." The implied criticism wasn't subtle. In my father's worldview, questioning his decisions, even silently, was tantamount to betrayal. "Is that what this is about? You don't think I'm loyal enough to the Wilson name?" "I think you've always had your own ideas about how things should be done," he replied carefully. "You're your mother's daughter in that regard." The reference to my mother felt calculated, designed to soften me through sentiment. It had the opposite effect. "She believed in earning success, not having it handed to you," I responded. "Something grandfather established as a foundation of this firm." A flash of irritation crossed his features. "Your grandfather's principles nearly bankrupted us during the recession. Reality requires flexibility, Megan. Something Daniel understands." Flexibility. A convenient euphemism for the ethical compromises I'd discovered. But I couldn't reveal my knowledge. Not yet. My investigation was still ongoing, the evidence not yet conclusive enough to confront him directly. "I received an interesting offer today," I said instead, changing tactics. "Harrington and Blake wants me to head their corporate litigation division, senior partner status." That got his attention. My father's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening imperceptibly. "Marcus Bennett is trying to poach you?" "Andrew Reynolds delivered the offer personally." "Reynolds," my father scoffed. "That opportunistic—" He caught himself, recalibrating his response. "I'm sure the offer is financially attractive. Bennett has always tried to buy what he can't build himself." "It's compelling," I admitted, watching his reaction carefully, "especially in light of recent developments here." My father leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of calculated concern. "Megan, I know the managing partner decision was disappointing, but your role here is crucial. Your grandfather's legacy. Is that what this is still about?" I interrupted. "Grandfather's legacy?" "Of course," he replied, though something in his eyes suggested otherwise. "Wilson and Associates is a family institution. Your departure would be problematic." Problematic indeed. Without my reputation and case management, clients like Hartford Technologies would likely follow me to Harrington and Blake. The firm's precarious financial position, the true extent of which I was still uncovering, would become untenable. "I haven't made a decision," I said, moving toward the door, "but I'm considering my options." "Don't make a hasty choice based on wounded pride," my father cautioned, his tone carrying a hint of warning beneath the paternal concern. "Family is forever, Megan. Career moves have consequences." The implicit threat wasn't lost on me. If I left for a competitor, the gloves would come off. The professional courtesy extended to family would evaporate, and Richard Wilson could be a formidable enemy in Westridge's close-knit legal community. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied neutrally, leaving his office with deliberate calm. Back in my own space, I closed the door and leaned against it, processing the conversation. My father's reaction to the Harrington and Blake offer had been revealing. He was concerned, not just about losing a valuable partner, but about what I might take with me. Knowledge, clients, possibly even evidence of wrongdoing. The situation was evolving rapidly, forcing me to accelerate my timeline. If I was going to fully understand the extent of the financial improprieties before making any decisions, I needed access to records that were currently beyond my reach. Records kept in the managing partner's private files, now Daniel's domain. I returned to my desk and dialed Lauren's extension. "Are you free tonight? I could use your help with something delicate." "I'll cancel my plans," she replied without hesitation. "Your office or mine?" "Neither. The file room, after hours." 9 o'clock. The firm's physical records were maintained in a secure room on the 16th floor, a vestige of pre-digital legal practice that my father insisted on maintaining despite the cost and space requirements. "Never trust everything to computers," he'd always said. "Paper leaves a trail you can control." That control was precisely what I was counting on. While most of the firm's current cases were digitized, financial records, particularly those related to client trust accounts, were still documented in physical ledgers maintained by my father's longtime bookkeeper, Gloria Raymond. A dedicated employee who happened to have a standing weekly dinner with her sister on Tuesday evenings, leaving the file room unattended after normal business hours. Lauren was waiting when I arrived, her expression curious but resolute. "Want to tell me what we're looking for?" I hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Lauren had been my trusted colleague for years, but involving her in what might constitute an investigation of firm partners carried risks, to her career as much as to mine. "Discrepancies," I said finally. "In the client trust accounts." Her eyebrows rose. "Accounting errors? Let's call them irregularities for now." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Serious irregularities?" I nodded, appreciating her quick comprehension. "Potentially, but I need proof before I can determine next steps." "And this relates to the management change?" Her perception had always been one of her greatest assets. "It might," I acknowledged. "Are you comfortable with this?" "I'd understand if you preferred to maintain deniability." Lauren straightened, her expression resolute. "I'm your deputy, Megan. Where you go, I go." The loyalty brought a lump to my throat. In a professional world built on strategic alliances and calculated risks, genuine loyalty was rare and precious. "Then let's get started," I said, using my security pass to access the file room. "We're looking for the Burlington Industries settlement records, specifically fund disbursements." We worked methodically through file cabinets, cross-referencing ledger entries with bank statements and settlement documentation. The Burlington case had resulted in a $12.7 million settlement, funds that should have been distributed according to a specific protocol, attorney fees to the firm, structured payments to the client, established reserves for potential appeals. "Here's something," Lauren said after nearly an hour of searching. "The initial deposit record shows the full settlement amount entering the trust account, but the subsequent disbursement to Burlington is short by almost $2 million. My heart sank. It was worse than I'd suspected. "Are there any supplemental disbursements? Sometimes larger settlements are distributed in phases for tax purposes." Lauren flipped through additional pages, shaking her head. "Nothing documented here. According to this, Burlington received $2.1 million less than the settlement specified, but signed off on the distribution as if it were correct. Who signed the client acknowledgement?" "Gregory Simmons, their CFO." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Simmons is meticulous. He would have noticed a discrepancy that large." We dug deeper, reviewing the signature pages more carefully. The authorization appeared to bear Simmons's signature, but something about it nagged at me. I pulled out my phone, searching through emails until I found an earlier communication from Simmons with his signature on a contract amendment. "Look at these side by side," I instructed Lauren, placing the phone next to the distribution document. Notice anything? She studied both signatures carefully. They're similar, but the pressure points are different. And the terminal stroke? On the S curves upward in the email, but downward on this form. Exactly. The implications were staggering. Not just embezzlement from client funds, but forgery of client signatures to conceal the theft. We need to check other major settlements: Richardson, Brookfield, Westmore Industries. The pattern repeated with disturbing consistency. Settlements received in full, disbursements short by significant amounts, client signatures that didn't quite match authenticated versions. The total missing from just the files we reviewed exceeded $5.3 million over a 3-year period. Megan, Lauren said quietly as we carefully returned the files to their original locations. This is criminal activity, not just ethics violations. I know. The weight of the discovery pressed down on me like a physical force. This wasn't just my father bending rules or cutting corners. This was systematic fraud that could result in criminal charges, disbarment, and the complete destruction of Wilson and Associates. What are you going to do? Her question hung in the air between us. What indeed? The evidence was clear but not yet comprehensive. I needed to understand where the money had gone, who else might be involved, and whether any of it could be recovered before clients discovered the theft. For now, document everything but tell no one, I decided. I need time to determine the best approach. Lauren nodded, her usual confidence temporarily overshadowed by the gravity of our discovery. You should consider the Harrington and Blake offer more seriously. Get clear of this before it explodes. The suggestion made logical sense. Self-preservation would dictate exactly that course of action. Accept Andrew's offer, transition to Harrington and Blake, and watch from a safe distance as my father and brother face the inevitable consequences of their actions. But something deeper held me back. Wilson and Associates wasn't just my employer or even my family's business. It represented my grandfather's legacy, my own professional identity, and the livelihoods of dozens of employees who had no knowledge of the fraud being committed by the firm's leadership. I can't just walk away, I admitted. Not without trying to fix this. Fix it? Lauren looked incredulous. Megan, millions are missing. Client signatures have been forged. This isn't a situation you can remedy with clever legal maneuvering. Maybe not, I conceded. But I need to try. For grandfather's sake, if nothing else. We left the file room separately to avoid drawing attention from the night security staff. As I drove home to my apartment in Emerald Court, the full implications of what we'd discovered continued to unfold in my mind. This wasn't just about Daniel receiving an unearned promotion. It was about a systematic betrayal of professional ethics, client trust, and legal responsibility that reached to the core of Wilson and Associates. My father, the man who had lectured me about integrity and professional duty throughout my childhood and career, was a fraud. His sterling reputation in Westridge's legal community was built on theft and deception. And now he had positioned my brother, equally complicit, as the firm's new leader to continue the scheme. I thought about my grandfather, Walter Wilson, who had started the firm with nothing but a law degree and a commitment to serving clients with integrity. About my mother, who had believed in the essential goodness of the man she married. About the clients who trusted us with their most important legal matters, never suspecting that the firm was stealing from their settlements. By the time I reached my apartment, I had made my decision. I wouldn't run to Harrington and Blake. I wouldn't expose the fraud immediately, potentially triggering criminal charges and destroying the firm overnight. Instead, I would build a complete case, understand the full extent of the embezzlement, and find a way to make it right. For the clients, for the employees, and for the Wilson legacy my father had corrupted. The next morning, I called Andrew Reynolds. "I've considered your offer," I told him when he answered. "It's very generous, but I need to decline." His surprise was evident even through the phone. May I ask why? If it's compensation, we have flexibility. It's not about the money, I assured him. I have obligations here that I need to fulfill before I can consider a move. I understand loyalty, Megan, but your father just passed you over for a promotion you clearly deserved. At some point, you have to prioritize your own career. His concern seemed genuine, which made me wonder again about the complex history between us. Andrew had left Wilson and Associates, and me, with clinical precision when it served his ambitions. Now he seemed troubled by my unwillingness to do the same. This isn't about the managing partner position, I said carefully. There are other considerations. A pause, then. Is everything all right at Wilson and Associates? There have been rumors. My pulse quickened. What kind of rumors? Nothing specific. He backtracked. Just whispers about financial pressures. The Burlington verdict was crucial, from what I hear. Financial pressures. An understatement if what Lauren and I had discovered was any indication. But if rumors were already circulating, the situation might be even more precarious than I'd realized. Every firm faces challenges, I replied neutrally. Wilson and Associates is on solid ground. The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't reveal the truth. Not yet. Not until I had a plan to address the fraud without destroying everything and everyone connected to the firm. Well, the offer remains open, Andrew said. Marcus was disappointed. To hear you're declining. But he respects your position. After ending the call, I stared at the phone, wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my professional life. Staying at Wilson and Associates meant aligning myself, at least temporarily, with my father and brother's corruption. It meant continuing to represent clients whose trust funds had been raided. It meant living with the knowledge of fraud while working to expose and remedy it from within. But leaving would mean abandoning any hope of preserving what was worth saving. My grandfather's legacy, the firm's fundamental mission, the livelihoods of innocent employees. It would mean surrendering to the corruption rather than fighting it. My office door opened without a knock, and Daniel sauntered in, his new managing partner confidence on full display. Hey, sis, got a minute? I gestured to the chair across from my desk, maintaining a neutral expression despite the surge of disgust his presence now triggered. What can I do for you, Daniel? Dad mentioned Harrington and Blake made you an offer, he said, studying me with newfound calculation. My brother had always been charming rather than intellectual, using his natural charisma to compensate for a lack of legal acumen. But there was nothing charming about his expression now. I wanted to make sure you're not considering it. I've declined, I replied, watching his reaction carefully. Relief flickered across his features, quickly masked. Good choice. Jumping ship now would look like sour grapes. Is that your only concern? How it would look? Daniel shifted uncomfortably under my direct gaze. No, of course not. You're essential to the firm. The clients respect you. That much, at least, was true. Many of our most valuable clients had relationships with me personally, not with Wilson and Associates as an entity. My departure would likely trigger a mass exodus, especially among those I had represented most successfully. What about you, Daniel? Do you respect me? The question caught him off guard. What? Of course I do. You're a brilliant attorney. Just not managing partner material? He had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. Dad made that decision. He thought the firm needed a different direction. And what direction is that exactly? I pressed, wondering how much he would reveal. Daniel glanced toward the door, as if checking for eavesdroppers. A more pragmatic approach to firm governance, less idealism, more business focus. Pragmatism, another euphemism for the ethical, shortcuts and outright fraud that had become standard operating procedure under my father's leadership. I see, I said evenly. And you're comfortable with this pragmatic approach? My brother's expression hardened slightly. Look, Megan, The legal world isn't the idealistic place they teach in law school. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. The greater good being? The firm's survival, our family's legacy. The irony was breathtaking. They were destroying our family's true legacy while claiming to preserve it. "Well," I said, reaching for a file to signal the conversation's end, "you can tell Dad not to worry. I'm not going anywhere." Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied. At the door, he paused. "We should have dinner soon, the three of us, like old times." Old times. Before I knew about the fraud, before I understood what kind of men my father and brother truly were. "Sure," I agreed with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Like old times?" After he left, I turned to my computer, opening a secure document where I'd begun cataloging the evidence Lauren and I had discovered. To this, I added my father's and Daniel's oblique references to pragmatism and flexibility. The picture emerging was worse than I'd initially feared. This wasn't a recent development or a temporary ethical lapse during financial hardship. This was a systematic approach to legal practice that prioritized profit over professional responsibility, partner enrichment over client service. And I was now firmly in the middle of it, walking a precarious line between complicity and investigation. Every day I remained silent about what I knew made me potentially culpable. But exposing the fraud prematurely would destroy the firm, hurt innocent employees, and leave clients without recourse to recover their stolen funds. I needed more information, more evidence, and above all, a strategy that would allow me to make things right without becoming collateral damage in the inevitable fallout. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. The Wilson legacy was in my hands now, for better or worse, and I would not let it end in disgrace. The next phase of my investigation required a more strategic approach. With Daniel installed, as managing partner and my father watching my every move with new suspicion, I couldn't continue accessing firm records directly without raising alarms. I needed an ally with unrestricted access to the financial systems, someone both competent and discreet. Gloria Raymond, the firm's longtime bookkeeper, was the obvious choice. At 62, Gloria had been with Wilson and Associates since my grandfather's days. She maintained the physical ledgers, processed client disbursements, and managed the firm's banking relationships with meticulous attention to detail. If anyone knew where the money had gone, it would be Gloria. Approaching her carried significant risks. If she was complicit in the fraud, my investigation would be exposed immediately. If she was innocent but loyal to my father, she might feel obligated to report my questions. I needed to test the waters carefully. I invited Gloria to lunch at a small cafe several blocks from the office, far enough to ensure privacy, but not so unusual as to raise suspicions. She arrived precisely on time, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in its customary neat bun, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "This is a pleasant surprise," she said as we were seated. "You haven't invited me to lunch since you passed the bar exam." I smiled at the memory. Gloria had been one of my most enthusiastic supporters during those tense weeks of waiting for results, even slipping a congratulatory card under my door the morning the passing list was published. "I've been meaning to catch up," I replied, scanning the menu to avoid her perceptive gaze. "Things have been hectic lately. The Burlington case, and now this transition with Daniel." She spoke matter-of-factly, but I caught the slight emphasis on my brother's name. Quite the upheaval. The server took our orders, a Cobb salad for me, French onion soup for Gloria, before I steered the conversation toward more substantive matters. "Actually, Gloria, I wanted to discuss something related to the transition. With Daniel taking over the administrative side, I'm trying to ensure all my cases are properly documented, especially the financial aspects." She nodded approvingly. "Always thorough. Your grandfather would be proud." The mention of my grandfather provided the opening I needed. You worked with him for what, 15 years? 17, she corrected. From when he first opened the office on Main Street until his retirement, back when legal practice was different. Different how? Gloria's expression grew wistful. Walter believed in transparency above all else. Client funds were sacred. He'd sooner close the firm than mishandle a penny of client money. My heart quickened at this confirmation of my grandfather's integrity. That must have made your job easier. In some ways, she agreed. Though your father's modernization brought its own efficiencies, the computerized billing system has certainly reduced manual errors, while potentially introducing opportunities for deliberate ones, I thought but didn't say. Speaking of billing, I ventured carefully, I noticed some inconsistencies in the Burlington settlement disbursements. Perhaps you could help me understand the process better? Gloria's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her expression shifting, subtly. What kind of inconsistencies? I kept my tone casual, though my pulse was racing. Just some discrepancies between the expected distribution amounts and what appears in the client receipt documentation. Probably just a filing error. She placed her fork down deliberately, her eyes meeting mine with surprising intensity. Ms. Wilson, Megan, if there are discrepancies in client disbursements, that's not a filing error. That's a serious matter. The stark statement hung between us. I had my answer. Gloria was not complicit. Her concern was too genuine. Her reaction, too immediate for someone involved in the scheme. I thought so too, I admitted, lowering my voice. But when I mentioned it to my father, he dismissed it as routine adjustments. Gloria's lips pressed into a thin line. There's nothing routine about adjusting client disbursements without proper documentation and authorization. I leaned forward slightly. Gloria, how much access do you have to the trust account records? She hesitated, clearly weighing her response carefully. I process the deposits and record the disbursements, but final authorizations come from the managing partner. Your father has always insisted on that control point. And now, Daniel. Gloria's expression spoke volumes. Yes, though I've noticed irregularities in the authorization patterns over the past few years. What kind of irregularities? She glanced around the cafe before answering, though no one was seated near us. Transfers to accounts I'm not familiar with. Settlement distributions that don't match the documented agreements. Client signatures that look questionable. My suspicions confirmed, I made a decision to trust Gloria completely. I've been looking into these discrepancies. What I've found suggests systematic misappropriation of client funds. Rather than appearing shocked, Gloria nodded slowly. I've had concerns for some time, but without access to the complete records or authority to question managing partner decisions. Would you be willing to help me investigate further? I asked. Discreetly? Her response was immediate and resolute. Walter Wilson gave me my start when no accounting firm in Westridge would hire a woman. I owe him my career. If someone is undermining his legacy, I want to know. We spent the remainder of lunch developing a plan. Gloria would compile records of all major settlement disbursements over the past 5 years, focusing on discrepancies between authorized amounts and actual client payments. I would document the potentially forged client signatures and track the mysterious transfers to identify where the misappropriated funds had gone. Be careful, Gloria cautioned as we prepared to leave. Richard Wilson doesn't respond well to challenges. I know, I replied, thinking of my father's reaction to the Harrington and Blake offer. But this isn't just about the managing partner position anymore. This is about fundamental integrity. Gloria's approving nod confirmed I had found a crucial ally, someone who remembered what Wilson and Associates was supposed to stand for. Back at the office, I maintained the appearance of focusing entirely on my caseload. If my father and brother suspected I was investigating them, they showed no sign of it. In fact, Daniel seemed increasingly comfortable in his new role, issuing procedural memos and calling unnecessary meetings to assert his authority. "We need to streamline our billing practices," he announced during one such meeting, his manner pompous. "Maximize efficiency and profitability." I caught Lauren's eye across the conference table, noting her carefully neutral expression. She alone knew what I'd discovered and understood the subtext of Daniel's corporate jargon, finding new ways to extract value from client relationships. "Any thoughts, Megan?" My father directed the question at me with calculated casualness. A test, perhaps, to gauge my acceptance of the new regime. "Efficiency is always valuable," I replied blandly, "as long as it doesn't compromise our service quality." Daniel nodded enthusiastically, missing the implied critique. "Exactly. Quality remains paramount." My father's gaze lingered on me a moment longer, searching for signs of resistance or suspicion. I maintained an expression of professional interest, though inwardly I was cataloging every statement for future reference. Each meeting, each memo, each policy change could potentially provide evidence of their intent to continue and even expand the fraudulent practices. Over the next 2 weeks, Gloria and I built our case methodically, meeting away from the office, to share findings and develop a fuller picture of the embezzlement scheme. The pattern that emerged was both systematic and disturbing. Client trust funds were indeed being raided, with millions diverted to offshore accounts under the guise of administrative reserves or contingency management. Settlement documents were altered after client signatures were obtained, with distribution amounts reduced and the differences pocketed. In some cases, signatures appeared to be outright forgeries, particularly when clients were corporate entities, where multiple executives might be authorized to approve disbursements. Most damning of all was the timeline. While my father had suggested to me that the financial improprieties began during the recession as temporary measures, Gloria's records painted a different picture. The earliest suspicious transactions dated back nearly 15 years, not coincidentally around the time my father assumed full control of the firm after my grandfather's retirement. "He's been doing this almost from the beginning," I said, staring at the spreadsheet Gloria had compiled. We were meeting in her modest apartment on the east side of Westridge, surrounded by financial records spread across her dining room table. It wasn't a response to financial pressure. It was a deliberate business model. Gloria nodded grimly. "The amounts have increased over time, though, especially in the last 3 years. Since Daniel joined the firm," I noted. The correlation was impossible to ignore. "There's something else," Gloria said, sliding a folder toward me. "I found references to an entity called Riverside Holdings in several of the larger transfers. It's not a client, and it doesn't appear in any of our official firm records." I opened the folder to find banking documents for an LLC registered in Delaware, with my father and brother listed as the only members. "A shell company," I murmured, "for hiding the stolen funds." Gloria's expression was pained. "This goes beyond ethical violations, Megan. This is criminal activity." "I know." The weight of the evidence was overwhelming. My father and brother had systematically stolen millions from client trust accounts over years, using increasingly sophisticated methods to conceal their actions. The question is, what do we do with this information? "The ethical obligation is clear," Gloria said. "Report it to the Bar Association and the authorities." She was right, of course. The rules of professional conduct left no room for ambiguity in such situations. As attorneys who had discovered evidence of fraud, we were obligated to report it. "If we report this now, the firm collapses overnight," I said, thinking aloud. "Everyone loses their jobs, not just my father and Daniel, but all the associates, paralegals, support staff. Clients are left without representation mid-case, and the chances of recovering the stolen funds diminish significantly once they're tipped off." Gloria studied me with concern. "You're not considering covering this up?" "Never," I assured her. "But I am considering how to handle it strategically. If we can secure control of the firm first, we might be able to manage the disclosure in a way that protects innocent parties and maximizes the chance of making clients whole. That's a dangerous game, Gloria warned. If it appears you knew and didn't immediately report. I know the risks, I acknowledged. But I also know my responsibilities. To the firm my grandfather built, to our employees, and most importantly, to the clients whose trust has been violated. We spent the next hour outlining a plan. I would need to secure managing partner authority before making any disclosures. That meant confronting my father and brother with the evidence and forcing a transition of power. Once in control, I could work with outside counsel to self-report to the Bar Association and authorities in a controlled manner, while simultaneously implementing a plan to make defrauded clients whole. It won't be easy, Gloria cautioned. Your father won't relinquish control willingly. No, I agreed. But he'll do it if the alternative is immediate criminal charges. As I drove home that evening, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on me. I was preparing to confront my own father and brother with evidence of criminal wrongdoing and force them to surrender control of the firm they'd corrupted. The personal and professional risks were enormous. My phone rang, the car's Bluetooth. System displaying Jason Stewart's name. I hesitated before answering. Jason had been unusually quiet since Daniel's appointment as managing partner, maintaining a polite professional distance that suggested he was processing his own disappointment with the decision. Jason, I greeted him, keeping my tone neutral. Everything okay? That depends on your definition of okay, he replied, his normally measured voice tinged with concern. I just left a rather disturbing meeting with Gregory Collins. Gregory, Collins was CEO of Collins Manufacturing, one of our oldest and most loyal clients, a relationship that predated even my grandfather's founding of the firm. What kind of meeting? I asked, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. The kind where a client of 30 years asks pointed questions about financial discrepancies in their last settlement distribution. My heart sank. What did you tell him? That I would look into it immediately and get back to him, Jason replied. Which is why I'm calling you instead of your father or Daniel. Something tells me you might already be aware of the issue. Jason's perceptiveness had always been one of his greatest strengths as an attorney. It made him a formidable litigator and apparently an astute observer of firm dynamics. It's complicated, I admitted after a moment's consideration, but yes, I'm aware of concerns regarding settlement distributions. Collins says he's missing over $800,000 from the Patterson patent settlement, Jason said bluntly. He has documentation showing the original agreement, but the actual distribution was significantly less. When he raised it with Daniel yesterday, he was given a runaround about administrative adjustments and standard fee recalculations. The knot in my stomach tightened. Collins Manufacturing wasn't just any client. They were one of Westridge's most prominent businesses, with deep community connections. If Gregory Collins went public with accusations of fraud against Wilson and Associates, the damage would be irreparable. Jason, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty, I said carefully. Have you noticed anything unusual about the firm's financial practices? Anything that made you uncomfortable? His silence spoke volumes. Finally, he sighed, heavily. I've had concerns for some time. Inconsistencies in client billing, settlement distributions that didn't align with the documented agreements. But Richard always had explanations, and as a non-equity partner, he didn't need to finish the thought. As a non-equity partner, Jason had limited access to the firm's financial operations and even less authority to question managing partner decisions. I'm looking into it, I told him, making a split-second decision to bring Jason into my confidence. In fact, I've been gathering evidence for weeks. What I've found suggests systematic misappropriation of client funds by my father, and more recently Daniel. His sharp intake of breath was audible over the car speakers. That's a serious accusation, Megan. I know. And I have the documentation to support it. Another long pause. What are you planning to do? Address it, I said simply. But I need to do it in a way that protects the firm, the employees, and most importantly, the clients. If you're willing, I could use your help. Of course, Jason replied without hesitation. Whatever you need. His immediate support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. In the midst of discovering my father and brother's betrayal, the loyalty of colleagues like Jason and Lauren provided a crucial reminder that not everything at Wilson & Associates was corrupted. Thank you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Can you meet me at my apartment tonight? Around 8? I'll explain everything then. After ending the call, I took a detour from my usual route home, driving instead to the oldest part of Westridge, where stately Victorian homes lined maple-shaded streets. My grandfather's house, modest compared to its neighbors but immaculately maintained, stood on the corner of Elm and 4th, its wraparound porch and gabled roof unchanged since my childhood visits. After my grandfather's death, the house had passed to my mother, and after her death, to me. Rather than selling it, I'd maintained it as a rental property, carefully selecting tenants who would respect its history. The current occupants, a young professor and his family, were away on sabbatical, leaving the house temporarily vacant. I parked in the driveway and used my key to enter through the side door, breathing in the familiar scent of lemon polish and old wood. While the furnishings were different now, the bones of the house remained the same. The carved banister my grandfather had restored himself, the stained glass transom above the front door, the built-in bookshelves in what had been his home office. I made my way to that office, now converted to a guest bedroom but still retaining the original mahogany paneling and window seat. Kneeling beside the window, I ran my fingers along the edge of the paneling until I found the nearly invisible seam. Pressing gently, I felt the hidden compartment release, a secret my grandfather had shown me during one of our last visits before his death. Every lawyer needs a secure place for sensitive documents, he'd told me, demonstrating how to access the hidden space built into the wall, especially when those documents might be controversial. Inside the compartment, I found what I was looking for, a small fireproof box with a combination lock. The combination, my mother's birthday, opened it easily, revealing a collection of documents my grandfather had preserved. Most were family papers, birth certificates, his original law license, my parents' marriage certificate. But beneath these personal items lay a sealed envelope with my name written in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. I had discovered the envelope years ago but had never opened it, respecting the notation beneath my name. To be opened only when necessary. Something about the gravity of my current situation suggested that moment had arrived. Breaking the seal, I removed several typed pages and a handwritten letter addressed to me. Megan, if you're reading this, you've encountered a situation at Wilson & Associates that has forced you to question its fundamental integrity. I created this secure space and left these documents hoping they would never be needed, but preparing for the possibility that they might. Your father and I disagreed fundamentally about the practice of law. While he is a skilled attorney, his vision for the firm prioritizes profit over principle in ways I could never accept. During my final years as founding partner, I became aware of concerning patterns in his handling of client funds. Without concrete proof, I could not make accusations, but my suspicions were strong enough that I implemented safeguards and documented my concerns. The enclosed documents detail financial irregularities I observed, along with correspondence between myself and the Bar Association regarding appropriate client fund management. Most importantly, you'll find the original partnership agreement establishing Wilson & Associates, with provisions regarding ethical violations that your father may have chosen to ignore in subsequent revisions. If you need these materials, I trust you to use them wisely and in service of the principles upon which I built this firm: integrity, client service, and justice. With love and confidence, your grandfather, Walter Wilson. I sat back on my heels, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. My grandfather had known, or at least suspected, that my father's ethical compass was compromised. He had prepared for this very scenario, arming me with information that might prove crucial in the coming confrontation. The original partnership agreement was particularly significant. If my grandfather had included ethical practice provisions that created a mechanism for removing partners engaged in misconduct, it could provide the legal leverage I needed to force my father and Daniel out without protracted litigation. I carefully returned the documents to the box, except for the partnership agreement which I placed in my briefcase. The confrontation that loomed would be difficult enough on a personal level. Having legal authority on my side would be essential. Back in my car, I called Lauren. Change of plans. The meeting tonight will include Jason Stewart. He's encountered evidence of the financial irregularities independently. Can he be trusted? Lauren asked, always the pragmatist. Yes, I said, with certainty. And we need him. He has relationships with clients who may have been affected, and his reputation in the legal community is impeccable. What about your plan to confront your father and Daniel? I considered this as I navigated through evening traffic. We need to accelerate the timeline. A client has already questioned discrepancies directly. If word spreads, we'll lose the advantage of controlling the narrative. Tomorrow, then? Lauren sounded concerned but resolute. Yes. After we meet with Jason tonight and finalize our strategy, we'll confront them first thing tomorrow morning. The pieces were falling into place, though not according to my original, more measured timeline. Gregory Collins's discovery of the discrepancies had forced my hand. While part of me felt unprepared for the confrontation to come, another part recognized that the time for careful preparation was running out. The fraud had continued too long already. Each day that passed put more client funds at risk and further compromised the firm's integrity. As I pulled into the parking garage beneath my apartment building, a text message appeared on my phone. Need to speak with you urgently. Meet at the Aspen Room, 7 p.m. Dad. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Had my father somehow discovered my investigation? Was Gregory Collins's inquiry more disruptive than Jason had indicated? Or was this simply another attempt to secure my cooperation with Daniel's leadership? Whatever the reason, the invitation presented both risk and opportunity. Meeting my father before finalizing plans with Jason and Lauren could be dangerous, potentially revealing how much I knew prematurely. But it also offered a chance to gauge his awareness of the mounting threats to his scheme. After brief deliberation, I replied, "We'll be there." M. The Aspen Room was the most exclusive restaurant in Westridge, its wood-paneled dining room and impeccable service catering to the city's elite. My father had been coming here since before I was born, and the maitre d' greeted him by name as we were shown to his preferred table in a discreet corner alcove. "Megan," my father said, standing to greet me with a kiss on the cheek that felt jarringly normal given the circumstances. "Thank you for meeting on short notice." "Of course," I replied, taking the seat across from him. "Your message sounded urgent." He waited until the sommelier had poured 2 glasses of the Bordeaux he'd ordered, his customary selection, before addressing the reason for our meeting. "I've been concerned about you," he began, studying me over the rim of his wine glass. "You've seemed distant since Daniel's appointment." "It's been an adjustment," I acknowledged carefully. "But I'm focused on my cases." Good. He nodded, appearing satisfied with my response. "That's actually related to why I wanted to speak with you. There's been a development with Collins Manufacturing." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of development?" "Gregory Collins has raised some concerns about their recent settlement distribution," my father said, watching me closely. "He claims there are discrepancies in the amounts." "Are there?" I asked directly. Something flickered in my father's eyes, surprise at my directness perhaps, or calculation as he formulated his response. "There are," differences between the preliminary settlement figures and the final disbursement, standard adjustments for expenses and contingencies. 8. $100,000 worth of adjustments? I pressed, deciding to reveal that I knew the specific amount. That seems excessive for standard procedures. My father's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around his wine glass. You've spoken with Collins? No, I replied truthfully. But I've reviewed the settlement documentation. The discrepancy is clear. A long moment of silence stretched between us as my father reassessed the situation and his approach. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly from paternal concern to cautious negotiation. Collins Manufacturing has been a valuable client for decades, he said carefully. We certainly want to address any concerns they might have about their representation. By returning the missing funds? I suggested. My father's expression hardened. By explaining our billing practices more clearly. Sometimes clients don't fully understand the complexities of large settlement management. I think Gregory Collins understands financial management quite well, I countered. His company has annual revenues exceeding $200 million. Nevertheless, my father continued smoothly, I'd like you to meet with him. You handled the case brilliantly, and he respects you. A simple explanation from you would resolve this misunderstanding. Now we had reached the true purpose of this dinner. My father wanted me to use my credibility with Collins to cover up the embezzlement, to become actively complicit in the fraud, rather than merely adjacent to it. What exactly would you like me to explain to him? I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. The legitimate administrative costs, the contingency reserves for potential appeals, the standard partner distribution calculations. My father waved his hand dismissively. The details that justify the final disbursement amount. Even though those details were never disclosed in the settlement agreement he signed, I pressed. Even though they contradict the distribution schedule we provided. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. You seem unusually concerned about routine financial management, Megan. I'm concerned about client trust, I replied evenly, and about ethical practice. A tense silence fell between us. My father broke it with a calculated shift in approach. Your grandfather was also concerned with ethics, he said, his tone almost nostalgic. To a fault, really. Do you know why Wilson & Associates was struggling when I took over? Why we were barely solvent despite 50 years of practice? I remained silent, letting him continue. Because Walter refused to modernize, refused to recognize that law is a business as well as a profession. His ethical purity nearly bankrupted us. My father leaned forward slightly. I saved this firm, Megan. I built it into what it is today through difficult decisions and practical management. Is that what you call embezzling from client trust accounts? The words left my mouth before I could reconsider, the accumulated evidence and anger finally breaking through my careful facade. Practical management? My father's expression froze, then darkened. Be very careful with accusations, Megan, especially ones you can't substantiate. I can substantiate everything, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The diverted settlement funds, the forged client signatures, the offshore accounts, Riverside Holdings, all of it. The color drained from my father's face, confirming that my investigation had uncovered the truth. For a moment, he seemed genuinely shaken. Then, with visible effort, he regained his composure. If you think you've discovered financial irregularities, we should discuss them privately, he said, his voice low and controlled. Making unfounded allegations publicly would damage the firm irreparably. They're not unfounded, I countered. And I'm not interested in damaging the firm. I want to save it. From you and Daniel, and the criminal charges that will inevitably follow if this continues. My father's eyes hardened. You've always been self-righteous, Megan. Just like your mother. The world isn't as black and white as you want it to be. Stealing from clients isn't a gray area, Dad. It's criminal fraud. He glanced around the restaurant, though our corner table provided sufficient privacy. What exactly do you want? I want control of the firm, I said plainly. Effective immediately. You and Daniel will resign your positions, surrender your equity, and cooperate with a controlled disclosure to the Bar Association. In exchange, I'll work to structure the resolution in a way that minimizes criminal exposure and preserves what can be salvaged of the firm. My father stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You're serious? Completely. The alternative is that I take my evidence to the authorities tomorrow morning, and you and Daniel face the full consequences of your actions. He took a long sip of his wine, weighing his options with the calculated precision that had made him a formidable attorney. And if I refuse your generous offer? Then I do what the ethical rules require, I replied simply. Report the misconduct. Immediately, regardless of the consequences. Even knowing it would destroy your own career? Your connection to the firm would taint you by association. I met his gaze steadily. If that's the price of doing the right thing, I'll pay it. Something like respect flickered briefly in his eyes, though it was quickly subsumed by self-preservation. I need time to consider, to consult with Daniel. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow, I said, placing my napkin on the table and standing to leave. I'll be in the main conference room with the firm's partners. Come prepared with your decision. As I walked away from the table, leaving my untouched wine behind, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and determination. The father I had admired and emulated throughout my legal career was revealed as something far less admirable, a man who had corrupted our family legacy for personal gain. Yet beneath the disappointment lay a steely resolve to restore what he had damaged, to reclaim the ethical foundation my grandfather had established. The confrontation tomorrow would be difficult, possibly even devastating to the firm in the short term. But it was necessary, not just to rectify the fraud that had occurred, but to ensure it never happened again. Wilson and Associates would either emerge from this crisis transformed, or it would end. Either way, the truth would finally be acknowledged, and the legacy my grandfather had intended would be honored. Sleep evaded me that night. I paced my apartment, reviewing the evidence we'd compiled, rehearsing arguments, and envisioning every possible outcome of the morning's confrontation. The meeting with Jason and Lauren had solidified our strategy, but nothing could fully prepare me for facing my father and brother with accusations that would forever alter our family. Jason had been horrified but not entirely surprised by the evidence Gloria and I had gathered. I suspected something wasn't right, he confessed. But the scope of this, it's staggering. The question remains whether your father will surrender. Control willingly, Lauren pointed out, ever practical. Men like Richard Wilson don't typically relinquish power without a fight. My conversation with my father at the Aspen Room suggested she was right. While he had appeared shaken by my knowledge of his scheme, his fundamental arrogance remained intact. He still believed he could negotiate, manipulate, or intimidate his way out of accountability. What he didn't know was how thoroughly I had prepared. The original partnership agreement my grandfather had left me contained a critical ethical practice provision. Any partner found to have committed acts involving moral turpitude or financial malfeasance could be removed by unanimous vote of the remaining equity partners. With Jason's support secured and documentation of the fraud in hand, I had the legal authority to force my father and Daniel out, if they refused to go voluntarily. At 6:30 the next morning, I arrived at the office, earlier than usual, but not so early as to raise suspicions. I needed time to prepare the conference room, distribute materials for the partners, and center myself for what would undoubtedly be an explosive meeting. Lauren was already there, meticulous as always. Conference room is set up, she reported. Materials are ready, but sealed until the meeting begins. Gloria has the financial documentation organized chronologically. Thank you. My gratitude encompassed far more than her efficient preparation. Lauren had risked her own career by aligning herself with my investigation. Whatever happens today. Don't, she interrupted firmly. We're doing what's right. Everything else is secondary. By 8 o'clock, partners began arriving for what they believed was a routine monthly meeting. None knew the true agenda except Jason, Lauren, and Gloria, who would be present to address financial questions. I greeted each arrival with professional composure, though my heart raced as the clock ticked toward 9. My father and Daniel entered together at precisely 8:55, both impeccably dressed and outwardly confident. Only someone who knew them as well as I did would notice the tension in my father's shoulders or the slight pallor beneath Daniel's carefully maintained tan. Megan, my father acknowledged with a nod. No indication whether he'd reached a decision about my ultimatum. Dad, Daniel. I matched his neutral tone. Thank you for coming. Daniel rolled his eyes slightly. It's a scheduled partners meeting. Why wouldn't we come? I didn't respond, simply gesturing toward the 2 remaining seats at the conference table. My father took his customary position at the head of the table, a placement I had deliberately left open. Let him believe he still controlled this meeting, for now. At exactly 9 o'clock, I stood. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your punctuality. Before we address the standard agenda items, there's an urgent matter that requires the partners' immediate attention. My father's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his composed expression. Daniel looked confused, then concerned as I began distributing sealed folders to each partner. Please do not open these materials until instructed, I continued. What you're receiving contains sensitive information regarding financial irregularities at Wilson & Associates, information that will require difficult decisions today. Murmurs of concern rippled through the room. My father cleared his throat. Megan, this wasn't on the agenda. Perhaps we should— I understand your concern, Dad, I interrupted smoothly. But this matter cannot wait. It directly impacts every person in this room and the future of this firm. Before he could object further, I nodded to Gloria, who had been waiting quietly by the door. She entered, carrying additional financial documentation in a banker's box that she placed on the credenza. For those who don't know her, Gloria Raymond has been Wilson & Associates bookkeeper for over 20 years. She has detailed knowledge of our financial systems and client trust accounts. She's here to answer any questions that arise from the materials you're about to review. My father's expression hardened. He clearly hadn't anticipated Gloria's involvement or the level of preparation evident in the meeting's orchestration. You may now open your folders, I instructed the partners. Please take a few minutes to review the contents carefully. The room fell silent, except for the sound of turning pages and occasional sharp intakes of breath. I watched as expressions transformed from curiosity to shock to dismay. Daniel began perspiring visibly. My father remained stone-faced, though his complexion had reddened considerably. After allowing sufficient time for initial review, I spoke again. As you can see from these documents, Wilson & Associates has been systematically misappropriating client funds for at least the past 15 years. Settlement proceeds have been diverted to unauthorized accounts. Client signatures appear to have been forged on disbursement authorizations. Trust account balances have been manipulated to conceal the diversions. This is absurd, Daniel interjected, his voice higher than normal. These are administrative adjustments, not— $800,000 from Collins Manufacturing, I cut in sharply. $2.1 million from Burlington Industries. $1.4 million from the Richardson settlement. These aren't administrative adjustments, Daniel. They're theft. Marcus Bennett from the Estate Planning Division, a senior partner who had been with the firm nearly as long as my father, looked up from the documents with visible distress. Richard, is this accurate? Are we missing millions from client trust accounts? All eyes turned to my father, who maintained his composure with practiced skill. These figures are presented without context, he replied smoothly. Client settlement management involves complex financial calculations and contingency planning that might appear irregular to those without full understanding of the process. I believe I understand the process perfectly, I countered, opening a laptop that displayed a PowerPoint presentation on the conference room screen. This flowchart illustrates how client settlement funds were diverted through a series of transfers, ultimately landing in offshore accounts controlled by Riverside Holdings LLC, a shell company registered solely to Richard and Daniel Wilson. The visual representation of the fraud scheme left no room for ambiguity. Several partners physically recoiled from the evidence, as if distancing themselves from contamination. "This is outrageous," my father declared, standing abruptly. "A vindictive misrepresentation by a daughter resentful of her brother's promotion. I will not dignify these accusations with—" "Sit down, Richard." Jason's voice cut through my father's bluster with quiet authority. "I've independently verified these discrepancies with Gregory Collins. His documentation confirms everything Megan has presented." My father's eyes darted to Jason with newfound wariness. He hadn't anticipated this. Alliance or Jason's independent confirmation of the fraud. "What exactly are you suggesting happened, Megan?" Elena Vasquez, our newest equity partner specializing in corporate compliance, asked carefully. "I'm not suggesting," I replied firmly. "I'm stating directly that client settlement funds were systematically diverted for personal use. The evidence indicates this practice began shortly after my grandfather's retirement and has continued with increasing boldness, particularly since Daniel joined the firm 3 years ago." Daniel's complexion had progressed from pale to ashen. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Dad handled all the financial arrangements. I just followed established protocols." The immediate attempt to distance himself from responsibility wasn't surprising, but the naked betrayal in my father's expression as he looked at his son was almost pitiful. "The ethical and legal violations are clear," I continued, maintaining professional detachment despite the family drama unfolding. "What remains is determining how we as partners will address this situation." My father regained his composure, enough to attempt a counterattack. "If these so-called irregularities existed, which I categorically deny, reporting them publicly would destroy this firm overnight. Every partner in this room would face financial ruin and professional disgrace by association." It was a calculated appeal to self-interest, suggesting that concealment was in everyone's best interest regardless of the truth. I had anticipated this approach. "That's precisely why I've developed a structured remediation plan," I responded, turning to a new slide in the presentation. One that addresses the ethical obligation to report while minimizing collateral damage to innocent parties, including all of you. The partners leaned forward, their expressions a mix of skepticism and desperate hope. "The plan has 3 components," I explained. "First, immediate leadership change. Richard and Daniel would resign all positions and relinquish their equity in the firm. Second, full financial remediation. All misappropriated client funds would be restored through liquidation of identified assets, including the Riverside Holdings accounts. Third, self-reporting to the Bar Association and relevant authorities with a comprehensive disclosure and corrective action plan." "And you would assume control?" my father asked, his tone insinuating naked ambition rather than ethical concern, motivated my actions. "Leadership would be determined by partner vote, in accordance with the original partnership agreement," I corrected, sliding copies of the document my grandfather had preserved toward the center of the table. "The important thing is establishing a firewall between those involved in the financial improprieties and those managing the firm going forward." Elena studied the remediation proposal with her characteristic thoroughness. "This might work from a damage control perspective," she acknowledged reluctantly. "But it still leaves significant legal exposure for the firm as an entity, which is why I've also consulted discreetly with former SEC Enforcement Counsel," I replied. "They believe a proactive self-disclosure with full remediation significantly reduces the likelihood of entity-level prosecution. The focus would remain on individual actors rather than the firm itself." Marcus rubbed his temples, visibly distressed. "And if Richard and Daniel refuse to resign, What then? I had hoped to avoid this contingency in the meeting, preferring to negotiate my father and brother's departures privately. But their defiant postures made it clear more leverage would be necessary. Section 14.3 of the original partnership agreement, I stated, directing everyone's attention to the relevant provision. It establishes a mechanism for removing partners who commit acts involving moral turpitude or financial malfeasance through unanimous vote of non-implicated equity partners. That section was removed in the 1998 revision. My father interjected sharply. The revision that you implemented unilaterally after grandfather's retirement, I countered. A revision that was never properly ratified according to the amendment. Procedures in the original agreement. Legally, the original provisions remain controlling. This revelation visibly rattled my father. He had assumed the partnership agreement safeguards were long buried, forgotten by everyone except him. Even if that were true, which I dispute, he argued, you'd need unanimous agreement from all equity partners. Good luck achieving that when everyone's self-interest lies in maintaining the status quo and avoiding public scandal. The room fell, silent as partners exchanged uncomfortable glances, weighing their personal risk against their professional ethics. My father's confident smile suggested he believed he'd identified my plan's fatal flaw. The practical self-interest of our colleagues would override their ethical obligations. Actually, Jason broke the silence, I believe unanimous agreement is achievable. I've already indicated my support for Megan's plan. He looked around the table. Who else stands for integrity over self-preservation? Elena raised her hand, without hesitation. The compliance attorney who ignored compliance issues would have no career anyway. I support the remediation plan. Marcus followed, though with obvious reluctance. My entire estate planning practice is built on trust. I can't be associated with financial improprieties. I support the plan. One by one, the remaining partners declared their positions until only my father and Daniel remained opposed. Their expressions shifted from confidence to disbelief as they realized the unified front they faced. This is absurd, my father sputtered, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. A coup based on manipulated evidence and misrepresented facts. The facts speak for themselves, Richard, Jason replied calmly. The question now is whether you and Daniel will exit gracefully or force us to proceed with formal removal and reporting. My father's gaze locked with mine, searching for weakness or uncertainty. Finding none, his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before, a cold calculation that chilled me despite the room's warm temperature. You think you've won, he said quietly. But you have no idea what you've started. This firm exists because of my relationships, my reputation. Remove me and everything collapses regardless of your careful plan. That's a risk we're prepared to accept, I replied evenly. The alternative is continuing to perpetuate fraud until inevitable discovery destroys everything anyway. Daniel, who had remained uncharacteristically silent through most of the confrontation, suddenly stood. I resign, he announced abruptly, effective immediately. The declaration startled everyone, especially my father, who stared at his son with naked betrayal. Daniel, sit down, we're not— It's over, Dad, Daniel interrupted, his voice trembling slightly. They have everything. The accounts, the transfers, even Riverside Holdings. I'm not going to prison for this. The naked self-preservation in Daniel's abandonment seemed to deflate my father more than the evidence or partner vote had. His son, the heir he had groomed at my expense, the loyalist he had elevated to protect their scheme, had folded at the first real pressure. And you? Jason directed the question at my father. Will you resign voluntarily, or shall we proceed with the formal vote? My father's gaze swept the room, measuring potential allies and finding none. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the dangerous edge I recognized from his most aggressive courtroom performances. I built this firm into what it is today. Without me, Wilson and Associates would have remained a forgettable small-town practice handling real estate closings and simple wills. Whatever financial creativity may have occurred was in service of growth and prosperity that benefited everyone in this room. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. I will not resign. I will not surrender my equity. And I will not allow this firm to be stolen from me under the guise of ethical concerns. The declaration hung in the air, its implied threat clear to everyone present. My father would fight, using every resource and relationship at his disposal. Then we proceed with the vote, I stated formally. According to Section 14.3 of the Partnership Agreement, I move for the removal of Richard Wilson from Wilson and Associates on grounds of financial malfeasance, specifically the misappropriation of client trust funds. All in favor? Every hand except my father's rose immediately. The unanimity clearly surprised him. He had expected at least some hesitation or abstention from partners he'd mentored over the years. The vote carries unanimously, I confirmed, maintaining procedural formality despite the emotional weight of the moment. Richard Wilson is hereby removed as a partner of Wilson and Associates, effective immediately. All associated privileges, authorities, and financial interests are terminated. My father's face flushed with rage, but his voice remained controlled. This removal is legally invalid. I will challenge it, along with these baseless accusations. You can expect litigation by the end of the day. That's your right, I acknowledged. But considering the evidence, I'd advise against further public attention to these matters. The remediation plan offers a path that protects what can be salvaged of your reputation and mitigates potential criminal exposure. Litigation would make that impossible. He gathered his papers with precise movements, his courtroom discipline evident even in defeat. You think you're protecting Walter's legacy, he said, using my grandfather's name deliberately. But you've just ensured its destruction. This firm won't survive the month without me. Without waiting for response, he strode toward the door, his posture rigidly erect despite the professional humiliation he'd just experienced. At the threshold, he paused, turning back to deliver a final statement. And Megan? Family doesn't do this to family. Remember that when you're sitting alone in an empty office wondering where it all went wrong. The door closed behind him with deliberate quietness, more unsettling than if he'd slammed it in anger. Daniel remained frozen in his chair, apparently unsure whether his resignation meant he should leave or stay. Daniel, I addressed my brother directly. Your resignation has been accepted. Please clear your personal items from your office by the end of the day. Firm security will accompany you. He nodded mutely, his earlier bravado entirely evaporated. As he shuffled toward the door, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Disappointment in the brother who had betrayed our grandfather's legacy. Pity for the man whose weakness had made him a tool in our father's schemes. And a lingering thread of familial connection, despite everything. Daniel, I called as he reached the door. He turned, his expression wary. Whatever happens next, get your own attorney. Don't rely on Dad's. A flicker of surprise crossed his features, perhaps at receiving even this small consideration after what had transpired. He nodded once, then left without further comment. The conference room remained silent for several moments after their departures, the remaining partners processing the dramatic confrontation and its implications. Elena was the first to speak. So, what happens now? It was the question of the hour, one with no simple answer. The most immediate crisis had been addressed, but the path forward remained fraught with challenges. Client relationships needed reassurance. Financial remediation had to be implemented. Bar association disclosures required careful preparation. And all of this against the backdrop of my father's promised litigation and potential criminal proceedings. Now, I replied, we begin the hard work of rebuilding, starting with a leadership structure that reflects our commitment to ethical practice Jason nodded approvingly. I nominate Megan Wilson as managing partner of Wilson and Associates. The seconding and voting occurred with surprising speed and unanimity. Within minutes, I found myself in the position I had never actively sought but now recognized as necessary, leading the firm through its darkest hour toward whatever future might be salvaged. As partners filed out, each stopping to offer congratulations tinged with anxiety about the challenges ahead, Lauren remained behind, her expression a mixture of concern and pride. "That went both better and worse than expected," she observed. "My father won't go quietly," I acknowledged, "and Daniel's immediate capitulation suggests he might become a witness against Dad to save himself." "Family dynamics at their finest," Lauren remarked dryly. "Are you prepared for what comes next? Your father's threat of litigation wasn't empty." "No, it wasn't," I agreed. "And he has resources we don't yet fully understand, along with relationships throughout Westridge's legal community. This is just the beginning of a much longer battle." My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Andrew Reynolds. "Just heard Richard Wilson was seen leaving your offices looking murderous. Everything okay?" News traveled quickly in legal circles. The ripples from this morning's confrontation were already spreading beyond our walls. "I need to contact our key clients before they hear rumors," I said, already mental prioritizing Gregory Collins and other relationships at risk. "We need to control the narrative as much as possible." "I'll coordinate with Gloria on securing all financial records and changing access credentials," Lauren offered. "We should assume your father might attempt to delete or alter documentation." Her pragmatism was exactly what I needed amidst the emotional turbulence of the morning. "Thank you for everything." "Just doing my job," she replied with characteristic understatement. "Though I must say, watching you stand up to your father was quite something. You reminded me of those stories you used to tell about your grandfather." The comparison brought unexpected emotion to my throat. Throughout this ordeal, I had felt my grandfather's presence, his principles guiding my decisions, his foresight providing critical evidence, his legacy at stake in every move I made. "I hope I've honored him today," I said quietly. "I think you have," Lauren assured me. "Now comes the harder part, honoring him through the rebuilding." She was right. Confronting my father had required courage and preparation, but reconstructing Wilson and Associates from the damage he had caused would require something more: vision, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the principles my grandfather had established. As I walked toward what was now my office, the managing partners, corner suite with its views of Westridge's skyline, I felt the weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders. This wasn't how I had imagined achieving leadership of the firm, but perhaps it was fitting. Wilson and Associates had been founded on integrity and rebuilt through crisis before. My phone buzzed again. An email notification appeared on the screen, a message from Marcus Bennett to all firm employees, announcing an all-staff meeting at 2 p.m. to address significant leadership changes. The wheels were in motion. There would be no going back. In the managing partner's office, my office now, I found traces of my father's hasty departure. Desk drawers left partially open, personal photos removed from shelves, the leather chair still warm from his last defiant occupation of the space. On the credenza behind the desk, a single item remained: a crystal paperweight engraved with Wilson and Associates' original motto, "Justice through integrity." My grandfather had commissioned one for each attorney when the firm was founded. My father must have overlooked it in his rush to depart, or perhaps had deliberately left it behind as a final repudiation of the principles it represented. I picked up the paperweight, feeling its substantial weight in my palm. The crystal caught the morning light, scattering small rainbows across the polished desk surface. It felt like a sign, or at least a fitting symbol of the transparency I intended to restore to the firm's operations. Setting it squarely in the center of the desk, I turned my attention to the immediate priorities: the client calls, the staff meeting, the bar association disclosure. the first steps on a path that would be neither easy nor quick, but necessary to reclaim what had been lost. My father believed he had built Wilson and Associates into what it was, that without him it would collapse back into insignificance. What he failed to understand was that the true foundation had been laid by my grandfather, built on principles stronger and more enduring than any single personality, no matter how dominant. That foundation remained, damaged but intact beneath the corrupt structure my father had erected upon it. With the right leadership and commitment, it could support something new, something worthy of the Wilson name as my grandfather had intended. At the intercom buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. "Ms. Wilson? Gregory Collins is on line 1. He says it's urgent." The first test of many to come. I straightened my shoulders, centered my thoughts, and picked up the phone. "Mr. Collins, thank you for calling. Yes, there have been significant developments at the firm this morning. If you have a moment, I'd like to explain them directly." The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. The first of many such discussions that would determine whether Wilson and Associates survived this crisis. As I spoke with Gregory Collins, outlining both the discovered improprieties and our plan to make full restitution, I felt a clarity of purpose that had been missing during years of working under my father's shadow. This was what my grandfather had built the firm to be, a place where difficult truths were faced directly, where client interests came before personal gain, where integrity was more than a word engraved on a paperweight. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was committed to restoring that vision, even if rebuilding required dismantling much of what had come between. For the first time since discovering my father's fraud, I felt a cautious optimism beneath the weight of responsibility. Wilson and Associates wasn't just a nameplate on an office door or a business entity on paper. It was a set of principles, a commitment to practice law with integrity, something worth fighting for, worth saving, worth rebuilding, if necessary. The path forward wouldn't be easy. My father's threats weren't empty, and the damage he had caused ran deep. But as I concluded my call with Gregory Collins, who had expressed cautious support for our remediation plan, I felt certain of one thing. The truth, however painful, had been the right choice. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same clarity of purpose that had guided me through this first crucial confrontation. Wilson and Associates would survive, not as my father had shaped it, but as my grandfather had intended it. That would be my legacy, and a fitting honor to the man whose principles had guided me through the darkness of discovery, toward the challenging but necessary light of truth. 6 months passed in a blur of legal filings, client meetings, and careful rebuilding. The all-staff meeting that first day had been challenging but necessary, revealing enough about the financial irregularities to explain the leadership changes without creating panic or implicating innocent employees in knowledge they hadn't possessed. Most stayed, though some departed for more stable firms, unwilling to weather the uncertainty that lay ahead. True to his word, my father filed suit the very next day, alleging wrongful removal, defamation, and breach of fiduciary duty. The complaint was masterfully crafted, painting himself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter's ambition. What he hadn't anticipated was our preparedness for this exact scenario. The countersuit we filed detailed specific instances of embezzlement with forensic precision, naming both my father and Daniel as defendants. The media coverage was immediate and devastating. Wilson family legal dynasty implodes amid fraud allegations, read the Sparrow Chronicles front-page headline. The story dominated local news for weeks. Daniel crumbled under the pressure, approaching our attorneys with an offer to cooperate in exchange for leniency. His detailed testimony about my father's systematic fraud provided the final pieces of our evidentiary puzzle. In exchange, we structured a settlement that required full disgorgement of his ill-gotten gains, but minimized his professional consequences. A 1-year license suspension rather than disbarment, no criminal charges if restitution was complete. The plea deal Daniel accepted was both a strategic victory for the firm and a personal heartbreak. My brother, for all his failings, was still family. Watching him sign away his legal career, even temporarily, brought a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. My father proved more resilient. He filed motion after motion, each more desperate than the last. When the court denied his request for injunctive relief that would have restored his partnership status, he launched a whisper campaign among Westridge's legal community, claiming I had manufactured evidence to orchestrate a takeover. Your father is claiming attorney-client privilege on all communication regarding client accounts, reported Elena Vasquez, who had emerged as my most steadfast ally in navigating the legal morass. It's a desperate tactic, but it could delay discovery. He knows it won't hold up, I replied, reviewing the latest filing. He's playing for time, hoping we'll run out of resources or nerve. The firm's finances were indeed strained. The remediation plan required substantial payouts to affected clients, over $11 million in total. We had recovered approximately $7 million from the Riverside Holdings accounts and my father's identifiable assets, leaving a significant shortfall that threatened our operational viability. The solution came from an unexpected quarter. Andrew Reynolds requested a meeting one rainy Tuesday afternoon in October. I expected another settlement offer in my father's litigation. Harrington and Blake had surprisingly taken on his representation, creating an awkward professional entanglement. Instead, Andrew arrived with Marcus Bennett, Harrington and Blake's managing partner. We have a proposal, Bennett stated without preamble once pleasantries were exchanged. Not about Richard's case. That's being handled by separate counsel to avoid conflicts. This is about Wilson and Associates' future. The proposal was both simple and radical, a merger between the firms. Harrington and Blake would provide the capital needed to complete client restitution and stabilize operations. Wilson and Associates would contribute its client relationships and litigation expertise. The combined entity would operate under a new name, Bennett Wilson Reynolds. Why would you take this risk? I asked bluntly. Our reputation has been severely damaged. The ongoing litigation with my father creates significant liability exposure. Bennett's response was equally direct. Because despite everything, your personal reputation remains intact. Your handling of this crisis has actually enhanced it. Clients respect how you've prioritized their interests above family loyalty. Andrew added, We've been monitoring client retention. Despite the scandal, you've kept nearly 80% of your book of business. That tells us everything we need to know about how clients view you versus how they view the situation. That guy. Merger offered a path forward I hadn't considered. One that would preserve jobs, complete client restitution, and create a stronger entity than either firm could be individually. But it would also mean the end of Wilson and Associates as an independent firm. I need to discuss this with my partners, I said after careful consideration. The Wilson name means something in this community, or it did, before all this. The proposal includes maintaining Wilson in the new firm name, Bennett clarified. We recognize the value of your grandfather's legacy, even if recent events have complicated it. I spent the following week in intense consultation with Jason, Lauren, Elena, and our other remaining partners. The consensus emerged gradually, but clearly, the merger represented the best outcome for everyone involved, from clients to employees to partners. The announcement of the Bennett-Wilson Reynolds merger 6 weeks later created a seismic shift in Westridge's legal landscape. The combined firm instantly became the largest in the region, with complementary practice areas that promised significant growth opportunities. My father's lawsuit collapsed shortly afterward. The evidence against him was too overwhelming, the potential for criminal charges too real. His attorneys negotiated a settlement that required complete divestiture of remaining assets, acceptance of disbarment, and a non-disclosure agreement preventing him from publicly discussing the case. The last time I saw Richard Wilson was at the settlement signing in our attorney's conference room. He had aged visibly in the months since his removal. his once commanding presence diminished by defeat and public disgrace. "You could have walked away," he said, as we waited for the attorneys to finalize documentation. "Taken the Harrington and Blake offer when it was first extended. Built your own career elsewhere. Instead, you chose this." "I chose the truth," I corrected quietly. Everything else followed from that decision. He studied me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Perhaps seeing, for the first time, not his daughter, but a formidable opponent who had outmaneuvered him. "Walter would be proud," he finally said, his tone making it unclear whether this was compliment or criticism. "I hope so," I replied simply. The signing proceeded without further personal exchange. When it was complete, my father stood and buttoned his suit jacket, a gesture so familiar it momentarily transported me back to childhood memories of watching him prepare for court appearances, admiring his confidence and presence. "What will you do now?" I asked impulsively as he prepared to leave. His smile held no warmth. "Retire to somewhere warm. Reflect on the importance of family loyalty." He paused at the door. "Daniel asked about you last week, said you haven't returned his calls." The implied accusation stung, though I kept my expression neutral. Daniel had indeed reached out several times since his settlement, but I wasn't ready for reconciliation. Not yet, perhaps not ever. "He made his choices," I replied. "As did you." My father nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than agreement, then departed without further comment. As the door closed behind him, I felt a complex emotional weight simultaneously lift and settle. The confrontation concluded, yet the aftermath still to be fully processed. The merger implementation consumed the following months. My role as managing partner of the litigation practice placed me on the executive committee of Bennett Wilson Reynolds, working alongside Marcus Bennett and Andrew Reynolds to integrate the firm's operations, cultures, and client relationships. Working with Andrew proved less complicated than I had anticipated. Our personal history remained acknowledged but unaddressed, creating a professional detachment that served the new firm's interests. Occasionally, I caught him watching me during meetings with an expression that suggested unresolved questions, but neither of us sought to revisit the past. 6 months after the merger announcement, Bennett Wilson Reynolds hosted a formal reception at the Grand Hotel to introduce the combined firm to Westridge's business community. The event represented more than a professional milestone. It marked the transition from crisis management to forward-looking growth. I stood near the entrance, greeting clients and colleagues with Lauren beside me, when Gregory Collins arrived with his wife. As our first major client to discover the financial improprieties, Collins Manufacturing's continued relationship with the firm carried particular significance. "Megan Wilson," Collins greeted me warmly. Or should I say, Megan Wilson, Executive Managing Partner. "Quite a journey you've had this past year." "A necessary one," I replied, shaking his hand. "Thank you for staying with us through it all." "You know why we stayed?" he asked, gesturing around the elegant reception. "Because when you discovered something wrong, you fixed it. Transparency builds more trust than perfection ever could." His words resonated deeply. Throughout the ordeal, I had worried that clients would view the scandal as reason to abandon the firm. Some had, certainly. But many had recognized what Collins articulated, that integrity isn't about being flawless, but about addressing flaws honestly when discovered. Later in the evening, I found a quiet moment in the hotel's garden terrace, taking a brief respite from the constant conversation and professional networking. The night air carried the scent of jasmine from planters positioned throughout the space, a peaceful contrast to the tension that had defined recent months. "Quite a triumph," Vanessa Parker observed, joining me at the stone balustrade overlooking the garden. My mother's friend had provided crucial support during the darkest moments of the crisis, offering both professional expertise and personal encouragement. From potential collapse to the region's leading firm in less than a year. Impressive by any standard. It wasn't the path I would have chosen, I admitted. But perhaps it was the one that was needed. Your grandfather used to say something similar, Vanessa remarked. That the law reveals the path you need, not necessarily the one you want. The mention of my grandfather brought a smile. I wish he could see this. He can, she replied simply, gesturing toward the reception inside where Jason was sharing a laugh with Marcus Bennett, where Lauren was explaining something to a group of attentive associates, where Elena was introducing clients to their new legal teams. His legacy continues in how you practice law, in the ethics you've restored to the firm. The name on the door may have changed, but the principles remain. As if to punctuate her point, Andrew approached with a champagne flute extended toward me. A moment of your time, executive managing partner. Marcus is ready to make the formal announcement. I accepted the champagne and followed him back into the reception, where conversations quieted as Marcus Bennett ascended a small platform at the room's center. Thank you all for joining us tonight, he began. 1 year ago, few would have predicted the creation of Bennett Wilson Reynolds. Our firms had been friendly competitors for decades, each with distinct strengths and traditions. He gestured toward Andrew and me. What brought us together was a recognition that the future of legal practice in Westridge would be built on a foundation of integrity, innovation, and client service, values that Megan Wilson fought to preserve through extraordinary circumstances. The acknowledgement brought unexpected emotion. Through months of crisis management and merger negotiations, there had been little time for reflection on what had been accomplished, not just the exposure of wrongdoing, but the preservation of something worth saving. I'm pleased to announce that Bennett Wilson Reynolds has completed full financial remediation to all affected clients, Marcus continued. Every dollar has been restored, every account reconciled. This achievement, largely due to Megan's leadership and commitment, allows us to move forward with absolute transparency and renewed purpose. Applause filled the room, led by Gregory Collins and other clients whose trust had been violated and subsequently restored. The sound represented more than professional approval. It was validation of the difficult choices made, the principles upheld despite personal cost. As the reception continued, I found myself in conversation with a young associate recently hired from the Public Defender's Office, a talented litigator with more passion than Polish, reminiscent of myself a decade earlier. I almost didn't apply here, she confessed. After the stories in the news, but then I read about how you handled it. It made me think this might be a place where doing the right thing actually matters. Her candor was refreshing amidst an evening of carefully calibrated professional interactions. It hasn't been easy, I acknowledged. But yes, doing the right thing matters here. It has to. Even when it's your own family? She asked, then immediately backtracked. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. It was honest, I corrected gently. And yes, especially then. The law isn't just what we practice, it's how we live. My grandfather taught me that, though I didn't fully understand until recently. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself standing beside the elaborate ice sculpture centerpiece, the new firm's logo rendered in crystalline precision. The three names flowed together with visual harmony. Bennett Wilson Reynolds. My family. Name preserved in the middle, bridging past and future. Andrew joined me, his expression thoughtful. Not how either of us expected our careers to unfold, he observed. Competing firms, personal history, and now managing partners of the same organization. Life rarely follows expected paths, I agreed. For what it's worth, he said after a moment's hesitation, I've always admired your integrity, even when it made things complicated between us. The acknowledgement of our personal history was subtle but significant, the first direct reference either of us had made since the merger began. Complicated seems to be my specialty, I replied with a small smile, but I'm learning to navigate it. To navigation, then, he offered, raising his glass in a toast. I touched my glass to his, completing the gesture, and to building something worth the journey. Later that night, after the reception concluded and guests departed, I returned to my grandfather's house. My house now, recently reclaimed from its tenant status and carefully restored. Sitting in what had once been his study, surrounded by law books I had preserved and family photographs I had rediscovered, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me throughout the tumultuous year. The Wilson legacy continued, though not as my father had envisioned it, not as a dynasty built on deception and self-interest, but as a commitment to principles that transcended any individual career or generation. My grandfather had understood this essential truth, had tried to instill it in his son and granddaughter with varying success. In the quiet of the study, I opened my grandfather's weathered copy of The Nature of the Judicial Process by Benjamin Cardozo, his favorite legal text, marginalia in his handwriting decorating nearly every page. A pressed flower marked a passage he had underlined decades ago. The law has its roots in the past, but its meaning is measured by the needs and the values of the present. The words seemed particularly fitting. Wilson and Associates no longer existed as an independent entity, but its essential values remained, transformed rather than diminished by the crisis that had revealed both its vulnerabilities and its worth. I had not chosen this path, had not sought the managing partner role through the means by which it ultimately came to me. But perhaps that too was part of the legacy, responding to necessity with integrity, allowing principle rather than ambition to guide critical decisions. Bennett Wilson Reynolds would face its own challenges in the years ahead. There would be difficult cases, ethical dilemmas, competing priorities to navigate. But the foundation had been established, or more accurately, re-established, a commitment to practice law with integrity, regardless of personal cost. In the end, that was the Wilson legacy worth preserving, not a name on a door or a position, on an organizational chart, but a way of being in the world that honored both the letter and the spirit of the law. My grandfather would indeed have been proud. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.